The Cosmic Doctrine by Dion. Introduction. This volume of teachings was received from the inner planes during the years of 1923 and 1924. The one who transmitted it is a human being who has developed to an exceedingly high level. The personality of his last incarnation is known, but cannot be revealed. It can be said, however, that he was a philosopher and a teacher known throughout the world. In the terminology used in esotericism, this individual is one of the greater masters. The object of these teachings is to induce a deeper understanding of cosmic law and to expand consciousness, so that it may lead the reflections back to the source from which they came. These teachings will also constitute a basis upon which considerable esoteric knowledge can be built and will contain the explanation of much that has not hitherto been made available to the general reader. By virtue of the vastness of the conception, however, which is beyond the limitations of our concrete minds, it was necessary to resort frequently to the use of metaphor. The reader is advised that, in his efforts to extract the most from these teachings, he should persevere through study and meditation. The word master, used in esotericism, was not chosen by me because of the association between master and servant, nor for the association implied here of master and disciple. However, we have inherited expressions standardized by those who revived the research of the ancient wisdom in the West, and we must do the best we can with them, although it is possible and desirable to discard foreign words, usually Sanskrit or Hindu, and, as far as possible, utilize the equivalents of our own language. Logos has been retained in the text because it has a clearly defined application, whereas God tends to be rather vague and difficult to dissociate from sectarian convictions. With regard to the masters or adepts of the inner plane, I would like to make it clear that they belong to a stage of development much higher than that of disincarnate communicators who describe the paradises, personal celestial worlds, etc., of their own subjective inner planes. The latter are of little value to the average scholar. The former exercise very great activity, but generally work only through carefully chosen and highly trained individuals, except, naturally, for the contacts that each of us may make on our own account and which result in intuitive apprehension. This point, however, must be treated with great care and, unless the matter is sound, it should not be taken as genuine. The adepts of the inner plane have from time to time dealt with the question of their state and conditions, and 3 extracts are offered below which may be of great value to the reader unacquainted with the subject. These great intelligences have evolved beyond the necessity of incarnation, and all the experiences of their lives on earth have been absorbed in essence into their present constitution. It is needless to say that they have not incarnated and that stories of their lives on earth in remote places have no foundation. Anyone who knows what a master is by development can perfectly understand that they do not currently live on earth. There are, naturally, high adepts, highly developed and illuminated men, but they are not masters. It may be that in the future, as evolution advances, the Illuminati of the grade of master may continue on earth instead of passing to the inner planes, in full contact with the inner and outer planes in order to accomplish a specific work insofar as the physical vehicle is efficient. Extracts. 1. If a man intends to seek the path, he evidences a desire. This desire will be perceived by those who watch over the inner planes, and this man will be placed in a class according to his temperament. After having traveled a certain distance under this tutelage, he will be placed in the care of what is known as a guide. This is the first work in which souls are employed when they begin to work on this side. The guide will try to impress the teaching he wishes to convey upon the soul of his disciple by telepathy, and the disciple must try to catch what is said. Later, the disciple will be placed in contact with one of the lesser masters and will be one of the countless disciples for whom that master is responsible. A guide has only one disciple at a time, but a master has many. As he advances, the disciple will pass on to masters of higher grade. His problem will always be to catch what his master says. The higher the grade of the master, the further away he will be from the earth. 2. Who are the masters? Human beings like yourselves, but older. They are not gods, nor angels, nor elementals, but individuals who have begun and completed the same task that has been assigned to you. What you are now, they have been. What they are now, you may be. Do you believe so little in the survival of bodily death that you cannot imagine the existence of the masters? Do you believe so little in the doctrine of evolution that you cannot imagine the existence of human beings much superior to you, as you are in relation to the animals? Do you know so little of the power of the mind that you do not believe in the possibility of communication between you and them? If there is nothing superior to you, what hope have you? And if you accept this possibility, why not try it? And if you try it, why not consider that your first results will be rudimentary, imperfect, and inaccurate? But if you never begin, you will never reach the end. You must be content to speak in syllables before speaking fluently. If you do not try, you will never learn to speak. I will teach you this language. 3. The masters, as you picture them, are imagination. Note well, I did not say that the masters are imagination, I said, the masters, as you picture them. You cannot understand what we are, and it is a waste of time to try to do so, but you can imagine us on the astral plane, and we can contact you through your imagination, and although your mental picture is not real or perfect, its results are real and perfect. The masters, as they are believed to be in popular pseudo-esoteric thought, are pure fiction, but since you are a concrete consciousness, you will have to make use of the astral to reach the abstract. What is taught in occult science are the laws of astral thought. The difference between the man who touches only the astral imagination and the man who, through astral imagination, touches spiritual realities, is that the former cannot, in his concepts, rise higher than astral imagination, and the latter possesses in his soul spiritual realizations and aspirations which he brings to brain consciousness by means of astral imagination. The master responsible for the teachings collected in this volume prefaced his first lecture with the following words. I have devoted myself to teaching and have always been involved with students. It is by no means easy to offer an ordered cosmogony and a science of man, and perhaps I may even be somewhat disjointed, but it suffices that you have the material. In such abstruse matters, apologies must be made to the reader for the difficulties of communication, and allowance must be made for the fact that the communicator is attempting to find the most adequate metaphors to convey transcendental ideas. Each one must use their imagination and intuition when reading, for this is not the simple statement of the solution of an elementary theorem, but an attempt to transmit many abstract ideas in a reasonably concrete form to those who are still incarnate, carried out by one who for a long time has not felt the need of a physical body. The Society of the Inner Light, founded by Dion offers courses for those who wish to seriously continue the study of the Western esoteric tradition. Requests for information should be directed to the Secretary, the Society of the Inner Light. Chapter 1. The Dawn of Manifestation. The unmanifest is pure existence. We cannot say what it is not. Although it is not manifest, it is. It is the source from which all arises. It is the only reality. It alone is substance. It alone is stable. All else is an appearance and a becoming. Of this unmanifest we can only say that it is. It is the verb to be turned back upon itself. It is a state of pure being, without qualities and without history. All we can say of it is that it is nothing that we know, for if we know something, it is by its manifestation to us that we know it, and if it manifests, this proves that it is not unmanifest. The unmanifest is the great negation. At the same time, it is the infinite potentiality which has not occurred. One can best conceive of it under the image of interstellar space. In these occult teachings, you will be given certain images with which you will be instructed to think of certain things. These images are not descriptive, but symbolic, and are intended to educate the mind, not inform it. Therefore, you may think of the unmanifest as interstellar space, and of the Logos as a sun surrounded by his solar system of planets, and of the emanations of the Logos as rays. The unmanifest is the only unity. Manifestation begins when duality occurs. The primal duality is space and movement. The first manifestation was a current in space. The metaphor I use may convey nothing to your minds. All I can say is that space moved. These words will be for you the key to many things. Now, when space moves, it possesses this peculiar quality. Presenting no friction, it never loses momentum, but continues to flow. When space moves, two forces are at work. The force that causes it to move, the desire that space feels for momentum. The force that hitherto compelled it not to move, the desire that space feels for inertia. These two factors are present in all motion, but the desire for movement, being stronger, overcomes the desire for inertia, and the desire for inertia continues to act as a check on movement. Movement, therefore, is pulled up at intervals. It is for this reason that in the cosmos there is nothing resembling a straight line. All movement, therefore, has a slight curve in its projection. Consequently, it eventually returns to its starting point and forms a spinning ring. Well, the original movement is exactly a flow of space that returns after many eons to the starting point and then renews its journey. This movement produces a spinning zone of enormous circumference. This zone spins on a plane for immense eons of time. It spins with a changeless spin. But its tendency is to communicate its motion to the space surrounding it, which compels more space to enter the spin. All this, remember, is metaphor. The spinning on a plane continues until the stresses it generates provoke a new movement, and a second current in space sets in at right angles to the first, and the same process repeats itself. We now have two spinning planes, one within the other, and it must be observed that the second plane forms on the outside of the first and is, therefore, of wider diameter. For countless eons, these planes spin at right angles to one another, and all evolution depends on the difference in size existing between the planes. When the wider reaches the same speed as the smaller and older, it begins to attract one of its aspects. Consequently, the older circle is thrust against the newer. Now, one must imagine that the first circle possesses an upper and a lower surface. The upper surface of this outward rotating arc must be conceived as positive, and the lower as negative. The reverse applies exactly to the case of the inward rotating arc. The same thing happens with the second circle. These circles attract and repel each other. Thus, you may imagine that the upper surface of the outward rotating arc of the first circle, being positive, rises toward its complementary aspect in the second circle, and that the lower surface of the returning arc presses downward so that you have a second movement imparted to the spinning disk. When this secondary movement completes its first circuit and concludes its steady revolution, the new cosmos is in the making. This is the original beginning of a cosmos, expressed in the closest metaphor. The secondary spin of the first circuit is the ring-pass knot, and the circuit of the second manifestation is that sphere which opposes a barrier to chaos. In the outer sphere there is also a secondary derivation, and although it is a spinning circle in motion, it represents, for that cosmos, the original quietude, the immobility in which it is rooted. It is the thrust block of the force of the cosmos which resists and which makes possible the attainment of momentum, and which you may call ring chaos, the primeval evil. It developed from the reaction of the original force in order to take its thrust. It spins at right angles to the original spin. It neutralizes it. It was the pull of ring chaos that set ring cosmos in its second motion and thus formed that secondary spin which we call ring-pass knot, the original limitation. Therefore, at the foundation, it is primeval evil that enables the existence of the cosmos. Chapter 2. The Forces of Evil Negative. Before we proceed, we must explain the concept of evil. Looking back, you will perceive that the first movement gave rise to a secondary movement, in accordance with the laws of reaction, and that the second movement, in opposition to the first, produced stability. It is always the function of opposition to produce stability. Evil, in this sense, is merely the opposition to the angle of the first current. You will hear more later regarding the true concept of evil. Evil confers limitation upon finitude and, therefore, concentrates. And evil must be understood adequately, for then its forces may be used in their proper functions as a thrust block. It is when the position becomes reversed and an attempt is made to work the forces of ring chaos dynamically that evil arises in the popular sense of the term. Evil must be imagined esoterically as a limitation that allows pressure to make itself felt, just as it is rejection that allows concentration to be achieved. I will give an example. Sensuality, you say, is an evil and must be avoided. Therefore, the vital forces are concentrated on the higher planes because a certain expression is denied. If there were no denial, but only the free flow of perfect harmony, there would be no concentration and, consequently, no work. You cannot get work out of steam from an open vessel. This function of evil needs to be understood very carefully. You must always stand apart from evil. All advance to a higher plane is a reaction to evil. If there were no evil, there would be no point of development, and in consequence, there would be no growth nor evolution. Recapitulating the teaching, we have the original spinning of the ring cosmos. The reaction gives rise to the ring chaos. The attraction of the ring chaos induces a secondary spinning in the ring cosmos which forms the ring-pass knot. Now, this movement in the ring cosmos, spinning in a plane and rotating as it spins, as if it were upon an axis, establishes the boundaries beyond which the creatures of that sphere cannot pass, not even in thought. But this sphere is surrounded by two lines of force, the ring cosmos and the ring chaos, which are rotating at right angles to one another. The rotation of the ring cosmos is the source from which evolution draws its momentum, and the rotation of the ring chaos is the source from which involution draws its power. Evolution is a movement which goes from the circumference to the center. Involution or dissolution is a suction into outer space. The ring chaos does not belong to the sphere which it encircles, but to outer space. There is a very important point in relation to this. The ring cosmos has its desires turned towards the sphere which it encircles. The ring chaos has its desires turned towards the space which surrounds it. The ring cosmos seeks to expand the center. The ring chaos seeks to expand the circumference. The ring cosmos tends to solidify by contraction. The ring chaos tends to return to the unmanifest from whence it arose, and consequently, if its influence be not checked, to reduce to nothingness the sphere which it encircles. The ring cosmos, if its influence were not checked, would present itself static in the immediate present. These two influences are the source of all the force which exists in the cosmos. The ring cosmos, because it is concrete, builds. The ring chaos, because it is diffuse, never grows. Now, these two rings may be called good and evil, life and death, light and darkness, spirit and matter, being and non-being, good and evil, because each of these potencies has its root in its respective ring. But let it be clear that the ring good and the ring evil are not good and evil as you understand these terms, but only circles of force which spin at right angles to one another, and consequently in opposition. And it is simply the angle of the first to arise which is called good, and the angle which is in opposition to the original plane which is called evil, and it may be that in another cosmos, the first plane might begin to spin at another angle, the angle of that which you call evil. It would be good for its cosmos, because good and evil do not depend upon any angle or plane, but are simply relative to one another. The first force to arise is called good because, from it, arises the line of force called evolution. All subsequent secondary forces are measured according to this standard. In the measure that they move at the same angle, they are called good. In the measure that they approach the right angle, they are in opposition and are called evil. Evil is simply that which moves in the direction opposite to evolution. Evil is that which approaches the plane of movement of the ring chaos and, therefore, tends to revert to the unmanifest. All evil which establishes itself within a universe is attracted to the ring chaos and is self-destroyed, because the very idea of evil implies a force which tends towards non-existence. Thus, you may imagine evil under two aspects: that which enables one to apprehend the forces of good by opposition and thus secure stability, a bridgehead. Evil enables an exploration into space. Evil, if permitted to function unopposed, is the scavenger of the gods. Therefore, said a great one, resist not evil. When you resist evil, you lock up the good. You lock up the force of good which keeps the evil inert. This serves for nothing, unless you have a superabundance of good which banks up upon the platform thus formed and leaps to greater heights. Therefore, it is not sufficient to meet hatred with love, evil with good. That is the procedure of the ignorant, and that is the reason why exoteric religion has made so little impression upon the world. You must meet hatred with such hatred that it leads to a locking up of force. You must hate hatred, and, evil being made inert by opposition, love can take its place upon the platform and use it as a thrust block. Therefore, you should only oppose evil when you wish to do a constructive work, when you wish to do something new. Never oppose the evil you wish to destroy. Establish a vacuum around it. Avoid touching it. Then, without opposition, it will be free to follow the laws of its own nature, which is to join the movement of the ring chaos. It consequently passes to the periphery of the universe until it meets the spin of the ring pass knot, which it does not cross, but it can go to a place of such primitive simplicity that it resolves into its own elements, and these elements are cast into the attraction of the nearest movement, which is the nature of the ring cosmos, which is the nature of good. Therefore evil, when it is not opposed, resolves itself into a raw and undifferentiated material of existence, the first form of manifestation. It ceases to be organized. It ceases to have quality. It begins all over again, transmuted into good by neutrality. But the undisciplined man, if he knows the usefulness and the goodness of evil, may use it dynamically on the positive side of its manifestation, and not statically as he does when he evaluates its negative qualities, as the initiate does. Correction. We give below an explanation, coming from an authorized source, which intends to eliminate any confusion regarding the expression negative evil. To call the ring chaos negative evil is unsatisfactory. The word evil should not have been used, for it may cause confusion in many people, and it is probable that it would not be understood even by those who are familiar with our terminology. Without the change and the tension originated by growth, the cosmos cannot progress towards its own end. The ring chaos is not alien to the ring cosmos, but proceeds from it and is in eternal association with it. The interlocking of the two rings is like that of the conscious and subconscious minds of man. If the ring chaos is to be considered negative, it should be called negative good. The absolute is law itself. That which is in opposition is not necessarily in enmity. Chapter 3. The 12 Rays and the 7 Cosmic Planes. You must imagine the cosmos in its original aspect as a set of 3 spinning movements. All that exists is but movement, movement in space, pure movement, and the original movement which gives rise to all that exists begins before anything moves. The cosmos is bounded by that movement which is called ring-pass-knot. But beyond the ring-pass-knot, there are movements affected in 2 directions. They are the rings cosmos and chaos, good and evil, the sources of the forces known to you by these names. But, although these forces influence what is within the ring-pass-knot, what is within that ring cannot pass beyond it. These 3 movements are the 3 primaries of the cosmos, the first trinity. This is why the supreme being of this manifestation is always imagined as a trinity, and 3 is the fundamental number. Everything, after all, is reducible to these 3 influences. All that the subsequent tensions originate may be analyzed according to the harmony of these 3 forces. The force of the ring cosmos, which tends towards the center. The force of the ring chaos, which tends towards outer space. The force of the ring-pass-knot, which maintains the equilibrium between them and prevents one of these forces from going to extremes. The ring-pass-knot, however, derives from the ring cosmos and, therefore, partakes more of its nature than that of the ring chaos. The ring chaos must always be imagined as possessing an affinity with the outer space of the unmanifest and a tendency towards unmanifestation. It is turned towards the past and always seeks the conditions of the past. The ring cosmos strives to concentrate, just as the ring chaos strives to propagate. The tendency of the ring cosmos is towards the future. The ring chaos can never build anything, because, whatever forces it may originate, they diffuse unconfined into outer space. But the ring cosmos, in conjunction with the ring-pass-knot, conserves its forces. For the forces that the ring cosmos radiates into the space which is within its circumference cannot go out again because they are confined by the influences of the ring-pass-knot. Therefore, they act and interact among themselves, producing ever greater elaborations of influences. We return now to the point in time when the ring-pass-knot has completed its first revolution and the cosmos is assuming a form. Any form of force, when it has reached the maximum momentum of its type of motion, gives rise to secondary movements that serve to eliminate the excessive force which it is generating, for force generates force when moving under frictionless conditions. The original activity is movement. The second activity is light. The third activity is sound. The movement of the ring cosmos establishes secondary eddies within the area of its influence. Its tendency is to draw more and more space into its spin. It cannot expand outwardly because it is limited by the sphere of the ring chaos. It, therefore, expands inwardly, so that the spinning band finally becomes a spinning disk with a motionless center. The spinning disk, being rotated by the secondary movement, which is the ring pass knot, becomes the spinning sphere. The interaction of the two forms of movement is naturally neutralizing. Consequently, there is a breaking up of the simple movement of the disk into a series of adjustments. The principal point of activity ceases to be the circumference and becomes the center. Although the ring cosmos, the ring chaos, and the ring pass knot continue on a plane and spin in their own places, the synthesis of their movements gives rise to a series of revolving radii. These radii are the rays. You must imagine them as a series of revolving spirals connecting the center to the circumference and realize the influence of the ring chaos in the force which compels the expansive current to flow towards the periphery. The influence of the ring cosmos in the force which compels the current to flow towards the center. The center is the synthesis of all forces and their equilibrium. It will be realized, then, that above the cosmic plane the rays give rise to the central sun. We now arrive at the point where, in addition to the three great primaries which are strictly external to the cosmos they generated, we have a purely cosmic movement, the movement of the flowing rays, the rays which emanate and return. Well, these rays, these circular rays which are reflected back from the ring pass knot, must be imagined in pairs, each of them in special association with its opposite number, so that the true movement is a figure of the infinite eight, the expansive flow being above in one half of the circle and below in the opposite half. Here is a very deep truth, intimately connected with practical occultism. These new movements establish tensions among themselves which give rise to a series of concentric rings of movement, so that the cosmos divides itself into segments of influence. The movements of the spinning rays and the concentric circles are known as the great secondaries. There are 12 rays and 7 concentric circles. Within the segments are established the movements known as tangentials. The closest analogy to them is that of the Brownian movement of atoms, the intersection of the circles and the rays giving rise to angles, and the enclosed tangential movement thus produced introduces a new factor into the cosmos. Realize that we have studied 3 types of movement: the interaction of the original rings, the interaction of the rays and the secondary circles, the tangential movements occasioned by the opposition of the angles in the secondaries. In these tangential movements, the lines of force are continually crossing one another's tracks, being confined to small segments of the cosmos. Where they cross, a vortex is established by the opposing influences which modify each other's actions. Therefore, instead of proceeding in those smooth curves which give rise to huge circles, they are bent into a new movement, thus establishing a composite unit, 2 forces, which are no longer influenced independently by the attractions of the greater forces, but are influenced together. Thus are atoms formed, 2 interlocking forces which establish a vortex and rotate around one another instead of circling the limits of the cosmos. I have described the formation of the original atom. These atoms, acting as units, realize in the same manner around them the attraction of the movements and begin to move in their turn, and the same process occurs again. The moving atoms meet and spin, and so the process develops. The tendency of the composite atoms is to travel towards the periphery, and that of the simple atoms is to remain near the center. It is thus that the planes of cosmic matter are developed. Recapitulating, we have 1. The movement of the rings. 2. The movement of the rays and concentric circles. 3. The movement of the tangentials within the segments. 4. The movement of the vortices. 5. The movement of the composite atoms. These numbers indicate something else. 1. Refers to the absolute. 2. Refers to the manifest. 3. Refers to evolution. 4. Refers to form. 5. Refers to life. You have now taken note of the types of movement which configure the cosmos. The primary rings and the secondary rays and the circles. Well, these are the bases of a cosmos and its influences underlying that cosmos. It is their revolution that makes the great cycles, the days and nights of manifestation, a day being a time when the aspect of the cosmos is in what you might call the positive area of the magnetic field generated by the spinning rings, and a night, a time when it is in the negative area. With a knowledge of these cosmic waves, the illuminated man can estimate his forces. Whence the power of the knowledge of the numbers of the secret calendar. These, then, are the original influences. They must be imagined as being the framework of the cosmos. The tangential forces, within the segments of their interaction, establish vortices. These vortices are the original atoms. You can realize that in the building of an atom operate the same laws that enabled the ring cosmos and the ring chaos to build the cosmos. It is the law of opposing forces which produces stability. The opposing forces having produced atoms, the atoms themselves become forces, because they move in their turn, and thus occur different types of tangential reactions, movements influenced by more than one attraction. So that, from the simple movement at a right angle, produced by a single opposing force, the vortices may be described as of a polyhedral type. You can see the materialized form of such relations in the different types of crystal to which they give rise on the plane on which you live. So that you will get atoms in which the component forces of their tangential track may be anything from a trihedral figure to a polyhedral figure. Chapter 4. The building of the atom. You must clearly understand that the original atom consists of two opposing movements that rotate around one another. These are merely vortices, but the vortices can move through space as a waterspout can move over the ocean, and these vortices can be induced to assume a secondary movement. These secondary movements are those to which I refer as belonging to an angular track. Thus, you will have the different types of atom from the primal atom, which is simply a swirl, to the swirling atom that moves in a triangle, the type that makes a square, the type that describes a pentagon and a hexagon, etc. These atoms attract one another and can drift towards each other and become fixed in them by means of what, metaphorically speaking, I will call the facets of their orbits. Thus, they can constitute alliances among themselves. Consequently, different types of atoms arise in the cosmos and begin to gather into composite bodies. Each composite body, as it increases in size, increases also its power of attraction, so that the tendency of the cosmos is towards aggregation, and the aggregates constitute adjustments among themselves so that new forces arise periodically. They will be considered in due course. You will perceive that we have just described, in addition to the great forces of the rings of the cosmos, the formation of an uncountable number of minute centers of stability of varied types and the continued organization of the reactions between these centers. You will also perceive that great phases can be detected in the course of this evolution, for each new force that arises has had to radiate throughout the cosmos until it returns on its course by the ring pass knot, and it is only after it has returned to the place whence it arose, thus completing its circle, that it becomes a constant influence in the cosmos. The newly built atoms may collide with the limits of the rays and the circles and ricochet there, for eons before any coordination will be induced against them. But as chance governs the occurrence of two or more parallels moving towards each of them, their forces, where they arose, will reinforce one another and be more definitely launched into the orbit of their activities, so that mere ricocheting will give place to the ordered repetition of influences, and therefore to defined tracks. There have always operated in the cosmos the great lines of force which we call rays, and the currents of the rays gradually induce the great oceans of ricocheting atoms to flow in their tracks, so that gradually the uncoordinated forces are coordinated in the great tides of the cosmos, and although they fulfill their own tangential action, they also move with the great tides. I will now present to you a concept which may seem strange to you, but which is the basis of much practical occultism. At the beginning of these teachings, I said that space moved. When a movement occurs in space, the flowing action thus established remains. Space, when in movement, never stops flowing because it has no friction. A force has been generated which remains. This force may be combined with other forces so that for all practical purposes it ceases to be an isolated unit, although it still retains its original character. And if you analyze the unit of which it forms a part, you will find it intact. Remember this point: space set in motion flows forever. Thus, supposing, metaphorically speaking, that you move a pencil 1 inch over the paper, this movement will give rise to a current in space which will flow in its positive form in one aspect of the movement and return in its negative form in another aspect. This will actually happen, and whoever can perceive this movement in space will be able to perceive the action that gave rise to it. This is the basis of memory, and this is the reason why it is easier to repeat a movement that has been performed before than to originate a movement. And the more frequently it is performed, the easier is the repetition, because the momentum of space is cumulative and will serve finally to sustain the movement in its current. You will perceive that this explains much more. You have already unveiled before your eyes a cosmos which originates from space by means of movement and which is movement and nothing else, and you have seen also how the tensions of forces generated by these movements gave rise to an infinite number of vortices, built exactly upon the same principle as the great vortex which is the cosmos, because the same laws, and they are laws of relationship, hold good on all scales of manifestation. You will see then that the relationship occurs between the new centers of force thus built, and they tend to form new cosmoses among themselves, built according to the same principles. Dances of atoms give rise to new ring cosmoses, and the story begins again. These new universes, as they are called, while possessing the same laws of the cosmos before described, are also influenced by that structure of the cosmos which was elaborated before they began, and you will see that this law holds good during all manifestations. We will recapitulate the teaching relative to the rays, to the circles, and to the vortices. The rays and the circles are part of the primary movement of the cosmos. They, together with the rings, remain constant in the cosmos and are referred to as cosmic currents. The vortices are of another nature. The primary movements are circular. The vortices begin as straight movements, which, meeting opposition, assume a secondary circular movement. There are, therefore, always two forces involved in the creation of the primal atom, and this fundamental duality extends to all combinations that have the atom as a base. You will perceive that, when a particular sequence or series of units occurs in the rhythmic functioning of a movement, that series acts as the conditioning structure of any later elaborations and combinations that may be built upon that foundation. For example, supposing that an original movement of an atom is a trihedral tangential, A to B, B to C, and C back to A, whatever secondary movements may arise, And remember that the movement in a straight line is never maintained after the original impulse is extinguished. Conflicting forces reduce it to a modification of the original circular, so that the atom, which in its movement pursued originally a triangular course, will finally arrive at a movement consisting of 3 spirals arranged in a triangle. Each spiral movement will be executed under the conditions that govern the segment A to B, the B to C, and the C to A. Therefore, if you know what are the influences of the segment A upon the B, you will know the nature of the primary movement that underlies the spiral that presents itself to the superficial observer. This is a principle that underlies astrology, and this is the reason why the science of numbers represents an important part in all practical applications of cosmic principles. The original movement of an atom is a vortex, nothing more, a mere swirl around a nucleus of a mobile vacuum. The atom that you have seen described is not a primal atom, but an elaborated and complex structure. It is only when the primal atoms combine that such secondary movements are established. Well, an atom of triangular structure can form unions with as many atoms as there are facets to it. When each facet has linked to an atom, the group is complete and has arrived at a state of equilibrium of pressure with itself. It can no longer grow by accretion, but can act as a unit and can only enter into association with other units of the same type whose angles of pressure are similar. The primal atom, as I said, is a simple vortex, and the composite atoms of different types originate according to the number of tangential angles in which the circumstances of counterinfluences may throw the vortices. The vortices, it must be observed, arise primarily at the angles where the rays converge towards the central stillness. It is the close juxtaposition of the forces that establishes the secondary currents. Therefore, it is in the sphere that surrounds the central stillness that one can find the primal atoms. These, however, soon assume a secondary tangential movement and, thus, constitute alliances by accretion, as was described previously. As we have already said, there exists, in addition to the movement of the rays, the movement of the circles upon the central stillness. This movement gives rise to centrifugal action, and the atoms tend to move towards the periphery. The more complex the atom, the more strongly it will feel the centrifugal action, such that you will perceive that the circles contain atoms of gradually increasing complexity as they succeed one another. These atoms, originating in the angles of the rays, when they feel the influence of the centrifugal force, follow the line of a ray. Each atom, then, possesses within itself forces of 2 rays which establish the original vortex and then follows the track of one of these rays. Chapter 5. Atomic Evolution on the Cosmic Planes. Evolution on the cosmic planes must be primarily viewed as the gradual filling of the circle of space by the atoms. Immensely long eons elapse during this process. Thus, the original atoms occupy circle 1. The first configuration of composites, circle 2. The combinations of these composites, circle 3, and so on. These types of matter, as we may now call them, are scattered in concentric spheres throughout the cosmos, out to the limit of the ring-pass knot, following the lines of the rays, so that, while the first circle contains atoms of only its own type, each successive circle has in its atoms interatomic movements representative of each of the inner circles, such that the construction of the outermost atoms is much more elaborate. When the atoms reach the furthest sphere, a new force is established. They have encountered the opposition of the ring-pass knot. The atoms that are in the outermost circle are a greatly complex system of movements within movements. Having escaped from the central stillness with a centrifugal force, they are now repelled by the ring-pass knot and, due to the repulsion, return with a spiral movement. And it is this that gives the rays their peculiar formation. Reaching the center, these atoms rush swiftly outwards with a straight centrifugal movement along the line of the ray opposite to that by which they entered the center, to return again in the same manner, but at a slightly different angle, which will compel them, on the next track, to follow the ray subsequent to the preceding one, and it is thus that they revolve around the circle. When they are repelled by the ring-pass knot, they make a circular movement upon the plane of the outermost circle, thus feeling its force coming from all angles. They repeat this movement on each plane to which they return. Now, as has been said, every movement in space continues as a movement. Therefore, every influence acting upon these atoms is registered in the reaction of pressures inherent in their structure, so that each atom returns to the central stillness infinitely more complex after each journey. Each ray that intersects the circles at a different angle compels the atom traveling upon its path to experience different influences on its journey. Therefore, the final complexity of these atoms, when the described circuit is completed, although capable of mathematical expression, cannot be communicated to the finite intellect. But you can understand the geometry of these atoms, and if you know their numerical calculation, you will have the key to the explanation of the universe. These structures are still treated as atoms, not as in the case of chemistry, on the hypothesis that they cannot be resolved into any simpler structure, they being homogeneous, but on the basis that, although composite once formed, they cannot be resolved but are permanently units. You will see that the flow of the atoms towards the exterior to the circumference, and their return to the center mark a phase of the evolution of the cosmos, and the completion of the circuit of the rays by an atom marks a phase of evolution of that atom. When it has completed its circuit, it has experienced all the forces that the cosmos can offer it. And when all the developed atoms have completed their circuit, and the evolution of atoms in this tide is limited, because after a certain proportion of force has assumed a tangential form, a state of equilibrium is reached in the cosmos, for evolution continues from the first movement of a state of unbalanced force until equilibrium is reached. This is the completion of an evolution, a state of equilibrium and, therefore, a relative stillness. Observe that we have described three phases of cosmic evolution. The development of the rings was the first phase. They give rise to one another and act and react upon one another until a state of equilibrium is reached. Then, although they are static in relation to one another, that is to say, although they are in constant movement within themselves, they have maintained their movement constant in relation to each of the others and must continue to do so, given that, there being nothing to disturb them, the vortices established by the movements of the rings give rise to secondary movements, the rays and the circles. These, initiating their respective courses, developed them until they became static in relation to one another, and a second phase of evolution was already passed. In the third place, they, in their turn, give rise to the tangential movements which build the atoms. It will be the day of evolution, the night of static equilibrium, and the overcoming of one set of forces by another, which compels the equilibrium to plunge slowly, once again, into manifestation. The equilibrium is ended and new forces are in motion. These forces are based on the relationship of the units built previously and are influenced by the original determinants, the rings, the rays, and the circles. Within these limits, and subject to the nature of the units upon which they act, they can form new combinations, permutations, and rhythms of action and reaction, until the new forces have found their equilibrium, and, in their maximum completion and development, when the final combination has been achieved, they become again static in cosmic equilibrium until that period, as well as the equilibrium. This is why, although the whole new set of forces put in motion must arrive at a final equilibrium determined by the factors present in their natures, This equilibrium, being only a maintenance of position of movements relative to one another, being therefore a relative stillness, must always overbalance and head towards a new phase of evolution, because this is a cosmos built of movement, and movement generates movement. You possess, I believe, a clear concept of what has been called the structure of the cosmos. The rings, the rays, and the circles, these, having completed their evolution long ago, have fixed themselves in a static condition, the only change occurring being the passage of the cosmos through positive and negative spheres of influence, for to the cycle. These constitute great phases, the phase in which constructive influence is intensified. The circles and the rays flow constantly in their orbits, but when the positive phase is occurring, the expansive currents are accelerated, and when the negative phase is occurring, the returning currents are accelerated. The great rings, which are three, are the original Trinity, known to you as the Absolute, although the implication of the word Absolute is known to few. That is to say, the term Absolute has been used in the teaching of disciples without the disciples understanding it completely. Because there are three rings, the Absolute is a triune force. The three of them, operating together with an indissoluble interaction, are the three that are one and the one that is three. Relate the terms of the Athanasian Creed to this Trinity, and you will understand the intention of the initiate who dictated it. The rays form a complex system which will be detailed under the name zodiac. The circles are the cosmic planes. The central, then some composite atoms form further associations and are again set in rotation by the track of a ray. You will see, therefore, that it is only when the extremely elaborated atoms of the seventh circle form alliances that they begin to spiral back to the central sun. Chapter 6. The Beginnings of a Solar System. You have become aware of how these atoms, in their journey, advance up and down the rays, for they are too developed, too composite to remain on any plane whatsoever. When an atom, however, has completed the circuit of the rays and seeks to begin again, it finds its place taken by atoms which have had a later development. It cannot enter that stream because it is full. It must, therefore, remain in the central stillness. No atom runs twice through the circuit, and those atoms which have returned home rest from their pilgrimage, and when the last atom has returned home, all creation sinks into sleep and the cosmic tides fold inwards as the ring cosmos turns to its negative phase. Meanwhile, the rays flow and return and the circles whirl in their track, but the atoms do not move, although they contain within themselves an infinity of balanced movement. When, however, the ring cosmos passes to a new phase, new attractions pull towards the periphery. Now, the influence of the ring cosmos and of the ring chaos must be understood clearly. When the influence of the ring chaos predominates, there is an unbalancing force, that is to say, the ring chaos is in its positive phase, and when the influence of the ring cosmos predominates, there is a compensating force which repairs the excessive force of chaos. Thus, chaos calls into space that which is without, and cosmos balances and compensates until a static condition is produced. We have seen that the first phase of atomic evolution ended with all the atoms developed to their maximum complexity, withdrawn from the outer circles and gathered around the central sun. The ring cosmos has completed its work. All is balanced, static and asleep, but as the cycle turns, the ring chaos has its turn and overcomes the equilibrium it had reached, and the most composite of the atoms feels first that the centrifugal forces impel it, and so it attempts again to go forth. Thus, great units arise again beneath the lines of the rays, but they advance now not through empty space, for each circle is peopled with atoms of a different degree of complexity, whose specific gravity maintains them at a distance from the central stillness. These composite organisms, finding themselves thus surrounded by lower organisms, attract them to themselves by the force of their whirling revolution. And so, as it advances outwards, each of them is surrounded by a sphere of the matter of each plane which it carries with it. Do you want access to this and all the complete audiobooks on the channel, plus the ebook version? Click the link in the description or scan the QR code in the left corner of the screen to access our library, where you can listen to your favorite esoteric books without ad interruptions, lock your screen, or use other apps while the narration plays, and even download the ebook version to follow along as you listen. Listen on your computer via web browser, or download the app from the Play Store. After subscribing, you will receive an email with your login details, password, and step-by-step instructions on how to access the books through the Hotmart app.